Hello everyone, let me first welcome all of you to the 7th module titled Resistance and Social Movements Around Water. Just to introduce myself, I am Joy, working with Society for Promoting Participative Ecosystem Management, SOPECOM to be brief, which is a civil society organization based in Pune and which has been working on water issues for the last 25 years. I also convene a larger network called Forum for Policy Dialogue on Water Conflicts in India, which is a network that is trying to bring together both academics and activists who have been working on water conflict issues in the country. This module has been put together by my colleagues in SOPECOM, consisting of, apart from me, Neha, Craig, Sarita and Gabriela. In the present video, we have three of us trying to talk to you, that is myself and my younger colleagues, Craig on my right and Neha on the left. The module should be able to help you to analyze critically the possibilities, the opportunities, the dynamics around resistance and social movements around water. We have tried to configure this module around four basic components. The first component is this short video which you are all watching now, that apart from trying to explain to you the structure of the module, also talks to you about what is this resistance and social movements around water all about. The second component is a case study from India that is about mobilizing people around equitable access to water. The third component is a set of three short videos drawn from all across the world which focus on dams and resistance, privatization bottling plants, and thirdly, the right to water or fundamental right to water. The module should not take more than 2 hours. In fact, also the fourth component of this module is the quiz which you take at the end of the module. And as I said, the module should not take more than 2 hours. And welcome all of you to this module, and we hope you really enjoy this.
Since this module is about social movements, then the first question that comes to one's mind is, what are social movements related to water?
That's an interesting question, because that is actually the crux of this module, to try to understand what is social movements all about. I would say that the social movements are organized efforts to resist or transform policies and practices which could be considered as both socially and environmentally unjust. In fact, there are a whole lot of social movements around destructive projects, for example, like large dams. Or there have been also movements around inequitable access to water. Now, since the 90s, we also find there have been social movements around water privatization. So I think all these are organized efforts by the people to resist certain unjust policies, programs, projects within the water sector. I would also add that, for example, social movements around water could be, okay, there is no typology around social movements around water, but probably you could also in a way characterize some of these movements in terms of their transformative potential. Now there are certain efforts which is trying to mobilize people just to correct certain wrong things in the water sector. It may be access to water, or it may be in terms of higher tariffs or water price which people have to pay, exclusions and things, which really do not relate to the larger structural issues or inequities within the society. So they are only primarily trying to reform the water sector within. But there are also movements which are trying to reform or restructure water in more equitable, sustainable and democratic lines, which also relate to the societal inequities and things, and transform society as part of this whole effort, which I call the transformative movements. So you can say that there are movements which are already trying to change things within the water sector, and there are also movements which are taking water as a key area of work, but also try to relate to the inequities within the society and transform the society in a radical fashion. So you could see different types of movements fitting into this continuum around social transformation. We can also say that there are certain social movements which are primarily trying to say no to particular destructive projects. And many of the movements around large dams, I would say it is basically trying to say that no to a particular project. But there are also social movements which is trying to mobilize people around an alternative agenda, like how to restructure a particular project or more equitable lines, involve people in developing that alternative and things. In fact, the reading material which we have given you, which is about the South Maharashtra water movement, is one such movement which is actually trying to mobilize people on a positive agenda.
So now that I understand what social movements around water are and what are the different types of social movements that could possibly be in these related to water, I would like to understand what are the factors that cause these social movements?
I would say that social movements around water or resistance movements around water is nothing new. In fact, they have been happening for quite some time in history. For example, I would say that there have been resistance movements around destructive water projects, whether it is dams because of displacement and other type of issues. But I would say that since the 90s, the social movements and the resistance movements around water seems to have taken a new turn or has been engaged with new set of issues. This is primarily because, especially in the developing country, there was a type of an change in the entire political economy of nations, which is primarily characterized as liberalization, privatization and globalization. We call it the LPG regime to some extent, which is in a way is something like a neoliberal economic paradigm. Now that economic paradigm has brought into a different way of looking at water. Earlier, for example, water was primarily seen as a social good, as a resource which is tied to people's lives, livelihoods, environment and other type of systems. But I think post 90s we find water being seen primarily as an economic good, basically to create surplus out of water. So you find in the developing economies more and more water getting reallocated from the primary sectors like agriculture to industries and urban areas. So there are a whole lot of resistance movements because of this change which is taking place and the larger reallocations which are taking place. Or water privatization has come as a major issue in many of these countries. We also call it this commodification of water. It's something which you can trade in, you buy and sell, which was not there earlier, for example. Now even in the Indian context we find that most of the policies do talk about water privatization, either in terms of privatizing the resource itself or the service delivery, the mode of delivering water to people is being entrusted to private corporations. So there are resistance movements which are taking place all around this. I think this is the context in which we need to see the relevance of resistance and social movements around water.
So as Joy explained, we have liberalization, privatization and globalization that's actually changing a lot of our economics and the way we look at water and the policies around it. So if tomorrow there is some kind of a problem in my neighborhood where I need to build up a social movement around water, maybe because of privatization as an example, what are some of the mechanisms that I can use to actually build a successful social movement?
Okay.
I think people in different places have taken a whole different range of approaches. So you could of course have your more formal mechanisms. For instance, people could take the legal route. In certain cases, people could be encouraged to lobby their local elected representatives and they could make water an election issue. Then there's of course the information-based campaigns. Then say media, the use of media on a large scale is a very effective tool, whether it's traditional media or social media even. But then those are more formal mechanisms. There are certain cases where formal mechanisms don't work. So in certain cases people go in for something like civil disobedience of some sort, mass strikes or rallies, things of that nature.
And
just to butt in with one small issue. I mean, what Craig is saying is very interesting because that is in terms of the organized social movements and things. But I think people also resist some of this injustice on a day-to-day basis through their own some of very individualist actions sometimes. Now, for example, just not respecting certain approved rules around water distribution is also a way of saying that we protest against this. Or sometimes even they do some type of subversive activities on their own without any organized efforts and type of thing. So I think probably we need to take care of all these and say that these are all part of the strategies which people use to resist unjust projects.
And then could I be possibly facing any challenges when I want to build a good social movement?
Oh yes, of course. Challenges could be numerous. I think one of the main challenges that people face is essentially getting project initiators, whether it's the government, whether it's a private contractor, getting them to the table and willing to listen to the people's voices, the people's demands. But then even besides that, there are some cases where the challenges getting people themselves together, united as one common force. Because take for example in India, there tend to be already existing divisions within communities, say along caste lines, along class lines. So that can prove to be a challenge to get people together. Then I would definitely say that information, the lack of information and transparency also tends to be an issue, because if you don't have enough information about a particular project, then how do you essentially get people together? How do you organize a call for action of some sort?
Yeah.
Craig and Joy, I think you've covered the part of what social movements are, what are some of the factors, challenges and mechanisms that I can use to build social movements really well. I would still like to get an example from you, Joy, about a successful social movement here in India, since you have been a part of social movements before.
I would say that apart from the concrete examples, for example, the social movements around water resistance have been able to bring new concerns into the water agenda. It has been able to change policies, institutions and even the legal framework around water to some extent. Now coming to some of the examples, for example, the classic example of a successful movement has been in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, where they resisted a water privatization effort. Similarly, I think coming back to India, for example, I would say that the whole example of Narmada Bachao Andolan, which mobilized people around a huge dam called the Sardar Sarovar project on the Narmada river in the central part of India. Though they could not stop the dam, I think they have been able to force the World Bank to retreat from funding the project. That itself was a big gain. Or it also forced the World Bank to appoint the World Commissioner of Dams, which critically reviewed all large projects and came up with an alternative framework around dams and things. So I think that's a major contribution just made. Or another movement which I have been part of personally, the South Maharashtra water movement, which is we have given you as a case study to read after this short video, is also a movement which has not only resisted a particular project of the government, but it also brought in an alternative agenda in terms of saying that they mobilize people, saying that this water which is being brought into that area need to be equitably distributed, and they force the government to accept these people's plan. So I think there are many examples which you can find which have been able to in a way succeed or bring fresh or new agendas from a water justice perspective to the table.
On behalf of the SOPICOM team here, I thank you all for watching this introductory video. You may now proceed to the next section, which is our essay on the South Maharashtra movement. Thank you.